So I'm sorely behind when it comes to reviewing books, so I'm going to attempt to review 10 new releases in terms of SFF science fiction fantasy in this video here. I have lots to talk about, some books to recommend, some that I recommend skipping, and if that sounds good, let's get started. First, let's talk science fiction, starting with The Glass House by Madeline Ashby. This is the same author who wrote the VN trilogy that I really enjoyed. In this one, it's a separate story where we follow this tech startup that has recently been acquired. They go off to celebrate and they end up on this island with this glass house, this glass mansion. They go inside, and once they go inside, they cannot get out. This is one that is dark and twisty and is being compared to things like Black Mirror. It's a fun, suspenseful story. I think that I would most recommend this one to those that are watching this video that more prefer my thriller and scary content because it is more suspenseful rather than really leaning into the tech aspects. And if anything, I wish there had been more of that, because what I love so much about what this author did with VN was the technology piece, which I feel like is a little bit bare bones in this, but otherwise a fast page turner, easy to fly through. I love the mystery and I was pulled into the story, so it was an enjoyable read, just not an all-time favorite. Next is Navigational Entanglements by Aliette Bodard. And this is a short novella that follows a future where there are these navigators that help ships to get through this part of space where there are these mysterious and deadly creatures. One of these creatures escapes out of this space, and then one of the navigators has to go with a team to try to track them down. The world building in this is surprisingly rich given the fact that it is a short novella. It's very easy to fly through. I wish the plot had been a little bit more strong given that setup. It sounds like a really intriguing story, and I do feel, because I've read this author before, that they really do best in creating really cool ideas and exploring interesting futures, but sometimes their storytelling to me is not the strongest. They don't have the tightest narrative drive, which I feel, especially in a short story like this, is really necessary. So I enjoyed aspects of this one, but again, I think I would have liked it to come together with a more cohesive narrative along the way. Next up is Key Lime Pie by Hess, and this is a story that follows a young person who is just eating their pie in their diner, and they end up seeing what appears to be a UFO, and the story goes from there. This individual brings in some representation. They are non-binary and also autistic, and so they do see the world from a different perspective, which I think really adds a layer to the narrative. This one is really sweet, and I don't mean that as a pun. It's just a story that is a little bit lighter in nature, so I enjoyed it in terms of what it was doing. I appreciated that, but if you know my taste in books that tend to lean into the dark and grittier side of things, it's just not the kind of book that would make it to my favorites list, but I definitely think it has appeal. It has a heavy romance element, which again is not usually to my taste, but I think that for other readers, they will find a lot of enjoyment. If you're looking for something, again, a little bit lighter and cuter, this one might scratch that itch. Next is Baby X by Keira Piekoff, and this is a story that is set in a future where there is the technology to create life from any cell of a human body, not just sperm and egg coming together. And so this has some great ramifications for fertility treatments, especially for couples that don't necessarily have a sperm and egg that are both viable. Instead, the challenge that comes with the story, and this is where it kicks off into a thriller, is the fact that there is now a black market that is trying to get the DNA of celebrities and just very popular individuals. So they steal their DNA when it becomes publicly available. Maybe they throw out a cup with their DNA and saliva on it, and then people go off and use these illegal banks to go get their DNA and have these celebrities' babies. And so it's really crazy in terms of some of the ramifications that the story is playing with. It was very enjoyable to read. I am someone who is biased to enjoy stories that deal with fertility and kind of exploring different futures, because I did have a child through IVF. I kind of enjoy seeing these speculative ideas taken further. If you're looking for a hard science fiction story, you won't find that here. Instead, this is one that is going to appeal more to those that love sci-fi thrillers in the vein of something like John Mars, where it more explores how society reacts to the technology rather than exploring how the technology itself works. So again, if you like to take a speculative what if and turn it into an action-packed story, this one was engrossing, fast-paced, fun to read, and again, I think it will appeal to those of you that normally watch my Tuesday content and are looking for more of a thriller rather than a dense science fiction book here. Next, let's talk about fantasy, starting with The Night Ends in Fire by KX Song, and this is the first book in an Asian-inspired fantasy story that follows a young girl who at the beginning is going to be sold off into a marriage to help fund her father's drug addiction. However, she ends up escaping that life, that fate, and instead she disguises herself as a boy and then runs off to train and learn how to fight. This one's described as a retelling of Mulan, and I think that that comparison definitely holds up given the plot. I'm happy to say that this is one of my favorite books in this video. I think it is a strong debut. I think that it has a lot to offer if you love things like the Poppy War, you love things like She Who Became the Sun. This book gave me very similar vibes while still being its own work. It has a strong female character who really has to fight against her place in life and work to grow more powerful and strong, and I think that the author accomplished this so well. It was beautifully written. I was engrossed in the story. Highly recommend. If you love those kind of books, this is definitely the next one to pick up. Next is The West Passage, which is a interesting fantasy story that follows a world where there is this guardian who is meant to guard this West Passage. However, at the beginning of the story, that guardian passes away and they choose not to replace them with someone else in that position. You find out that there's a reason that this passage is being guarded. There is a lore or supposed story that there is something behind it that will come into the world. And so, of course, as you would expect, the story goes from there. This is one that I thought the world building was absolutely fascinating. I thought it was great from really shifting away from a lot of the classic tropes I've seen over and over again. Instead, this one felt incredibly unique. The writing I thought was actually quite lovely, if anything, just a little bit different, and really caught my attention right from the first page. In terms of the story and the characters, it didn't entirely grab me. It's a book that I really want to love and ended up being about a 3.5-star read, but very much I appreciate what it's doing, and I think this one has a lot of potential. I'll definitely keep an eye on more by this author, and while it wasn't a perfect read for me, depending on your need or requirement to have a very strong storyline versus just a great world and beautiful writing, I think your mileage will very much vary with this one, so I encourage you to pick it up for yourself if you are intrigued by that premise. Next we have The Dead Cat-Tailed Assassins by P. Djèlí Clark, and this is a short novella that follows a group of assassins. Now the marketing was very clear on this one, so I want to be clear as well that this is not a story about cats that are assassins. This is a story about people that are known as the Dead Cat-Tail Assassins, and so it's just a very classic but enjoyable assassin story. I thought that it was sharp and enjoyable and kind of hit all the beats of a typical assassin story, but I think that those tropes are things that a lot of us really enjoy, myself included, so I like this one. I don't think it's doing anything new or unique, but if you're someone who cannot get enough of the assassin genre, it's another one to pick up. But again, if you're looking for cute kitties in this one, you won't necessarily find that there. Next is In the Shadow of the Fall, which is a short fantasy novella that follows a young woman who is an acolyte in the school trained to become a full priestess. She is very anxious to move on into that role, and she sees other people moving on faster than she does. She ends up taking it upon herself to try to get ahead and ends up unleashing a vision that she is not prepared for, and the story goes from there. This is one that I can definitely see why it has loose comparisons to things like N.K. Jemisin, which I did appreciate. The world building, despite being quite short, does have some depth to it, and I think that it's very intriguing. I didn't entirely get engrossed by this one, possibly because it's so short, and I think that I like the world building a little bit more than I actually found the characters or the story itself to be engrossing themselves. But if you're in someone who just loves spending time in unique worlds and are looking for something like this, again, you might enjoy it a little bit more than I did because I definitely saw potential there. It just didn't quite hit the mark for me. Next up is Kavithri. I'm really not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. My apologies to the author and publisher. This is the story that follows a young woman who has been born into a group of individuals that once were powerful warriors in their society. However, through events, they got pushed down into the lower ranks and are now seen as this lower class. We follow her. She is trying to grow past her position, so she wants to go to this magic school. She wants to interact with the djinn and again grow into a more powerful position so she can escape the class that she is being born into. This is a book that follows a society where class is ever so important, and so the setup of the story is very relatable. I'm often looking for stories that have a non-European aspect to them, and I very much found that here. There's some interesting sprinkling of details that are less familiar to me. However, despite that other setting, I did find that the story itself really leaned into some heavy tropes that are just very familiar, very predictable, and really wasn't as unique of a story as I would have liked it to be. For me, the biggest challenge is I found the writing style to be very plain, very simplistic, very much feels like an author that are still learning their chops. And as someone who has a preference now for more specific writing styles, I think that this one was just a little bit not to my taste. If you're someone who does not care about the writing, as long as you have a good story and are just looking to get pulled into a story and flip the pages, this one might work better for you. But because it was very dialogue heavy, it just really stuck out to me. The writing itself was just very much at the forefront of my mind as I was reading, and it just was not really to my taste. So a book that had a great premise, great opportunity for me to love it, and just didn't work as well for me as I would have liked. I still appreciated it. I think I gave it 3 stars. but wasn't the amazing read I wanted it to be. And finally, let's talk about The Failures by Benjamin Lyers. It's a piece of epic fantasy that also has pieces of post-apocalyptic fiction within it because of the setting of this world. We follow a group of individuals that become known as the failures within the story. They are the lowlifes, the degenerates, those that have survived, and are all coming together in this world for a greater purpose. This is one that has had huge early marketing buzz, and I've seen so many people give it 5 stars, and unfortunately it did not work for me. A little bit of it might be a case of me, not the book, and it will be clear that specifically I was hoping this book to be more fantastical in nature, and while it is marketed as being epic fantasy, really it leans into the near future post-apocalyptic tropes, and it's not a particular subgenre that I really tend to enjoy unless it's mixed with something else and a little bit more fresh. Instead, this book very much felt of our world and didn't give me the escapist, engrossing feeling I'm usually looking for when I pick up SFF. And instead, this one just again was very dialogue heavy with very simplistic writing, and it just really missed the mark. It was something that never really pulled me in. I didn't get attached to the characters, and so didn't really care too much about their story and epic adventure they were going on. Again, I see other people loving this one, so depending on the kind of books that you like, this one might work a lot better for you. I wanted to love it, but it really was not the kind of book that I should have been picking up, so it ended up being a big miss for me and not something I enjoyed at all. So that's it for this video here. Let me know how I did of the 10 books I talked about. Are there any that you're planning on checking out or any that you're planning on skipping based off my short recommendations here? If you're interested in more SFF recommendations and reviews, hopefully you stick around and subscribe. If you want to help me out with this video, you can drop a comment, even if just a little emoji like a spaceship lets me know you're here. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, and I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.